Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week, in continuation with talking about the three characters who were featured in Darker Image, we're going to be talking about Deathblow number 1. Let's zoom in and take a closer look. First released in May of 1993, we get this really cool cover where it's the all like monochrome black on black except for the chromium red Deathblow logo, which just pops right off the page. I'm not sure how well it's showing up here on camera, but if you look closely, you can see the black image of Deathblow on the black cover where you see the line work is kind of a darker gloss black, whereas all of what would be the non-inking is in more of a matte black. It's a really cool look when you can see it in person, but on camera, unfortunately, it doesn't always show up all that well. Brandon Choi, Jim Lee, co-creators and story. Jim Lee, art. Joe Chiodo, colors. Mike Heisler, letters and logo. Wendy Fouts, color assistant. Kevin Cunningham, production. Deborah Marvin, editor. Chameleon Prime, color separator. We can see here on the first page of the book that Deathblow is sitting inside of a church in a confessional, and he is confessing for his past transgressions. He actually is dealing with some very deep remorse for the things that he's had to do in his line of work as a Navy SEAL, and is struggling to come to terms with some of the more, I guess, nefarious things that he's done in the line of duty, and perhaps trying to come to terms with the path that has put him on in his life. Here on the next page, it's a bit of a bloodbath as we see Deathblow going over images in his mind of the things that he's had to do, as he thinks in his inner monologue that he's had to kill men, women, and even children. And each time he realizes that, he's going all the way to the edge of the abyss, and he knows that he's going too far, but he can't seem to stop himself. We even see him on this really cool giant full-page image where he's on the back of a bull slitting its throat. And it's hard to tell if this was something he did while lost in a bloodlust, or if this is just some sort of a manifestation of the way he sees himself as just a mindless killer. Either way, it's an amazing image. The artwork in this is just top-notch. Jim Lee, of course, never failing to deliver. Here on the next page, we get an advertisement for Wildcats the Trilogy coming out in May of 1993, illustrated by Jay Lee. I don't know if I have any of these. I'll have to dig through my collection to look. And then on the next page after that, we see an image of Deathblow standing on an impossibly huge pile of bodies. So I can only assume that these are meant to represent all of the people he's killed over his life, or at least what he envisions as all of the people that he's killed over his life. And then him coming to the sudden realization that he may in fact be a bloodthirsty monster and not just someone who's acting in service to his country. Here on the next page, we see that we are back inside of the confessional as Deathblow realizes that he's quite ashamed of what he's done, and, he screams out to the priest, help me, Father, show me a way out. There's so little time. I'm guessing that's in reference to him living under the belief that he has terminal cancer and is dying. And we then see him pull a pistol out of his jacket and put it to the base of his chin in what appears to be him contemplating suicide as a way out of dealing with all of this guilt and remorse for all of his actions. The next page after that, we see another advertisement for ProGuard, the bags and boards that were produced by Wizard Magazine. And it seems as though they were really advertising heavily on this and their magazine, which I don't know if it was a quid pro quo type of thing, because it seems like at this point in time, Image was getting insane coverage in Wizard, and that might have been the trade-off, that Wizard was also getting lots of free advertisement in all the Image books, because in all of the books that I've looked at so far on this channel, I don't think I've come across one Image book from the early 90s that does not have some sort of advertisement for either Wizard Magazine or the ProGuard series of bags and boards. I don't have any way to necessarily prove any of this, but it seems like it could have been what was going on. However, here on the next page, we see that Deathblow has lowered the pistol and is actually quite scorning of himself over the fact that he doesn't have the courage to pull the trigger and kill himself, despite the fact that he's killed so many others. And we get a really solid glimpse into the inner turmoil that he is dealing with as a character, and just the mental struggles that are just weighing on him on a regular basis for everything that he's had to deal with throughout his professional career. On the next page after that, we get an ad for Stormwatch number 0. And if you'd like to know more about Stormwatch number 0, check out my video on Stormwatch number 0. We then see Deathblow collapse in a heap down on the floor, completely broken, and just begging for God to save him, as he just can't seem to bear the guilt that he's feeling. We then, on the next page, however, see that there is someone walking towards the confessional. Deathblow hears these footsteps and quickly steps out. We then see that the person walking towards the confessional was the priest, which means that there was no priest that he was confessing any of this to. And the priest asks him if there is anything he needs to talk about. However, Deathblow walks by the priest and says nothing, and the priest just says, "May the Lord be with you." We see Deathblow then exiting the church, as he says that there's not going to be any Lord with him tonight because he's killed too many innocent people in the name of his country. And God help him, he's going to do it again. We see him walking across the street, stepping over top of what looks to be a tabloid of sorts. We see Miracle Boy in Philadelphia brings man back from the dead, Madonna to give birth to Elvis's love child, the new Kevorkian diet, never gain weight again. This, by the way, if you don't know, is a joke about the fact that Dr. Kevorkian was a guy in the early 90s who was helping people commit doctor-assisted suicide. And what I find interesting as he's getting into his truck here is that we see a newspaper stand right here, or I'm sorry, a newspaper machine that has the Washington Gazette. So I guess it's supposed to be like the Washington Post, sort of. But the headline reads, "Saddam Hussein bars U.S. weapons inspectors, fears of hidden nuclear weapons." And I feel like this is really interesting. This is, of course, released in 1993, but this is basically the kind of headline that you would have seen in late 2001, early 2002, that led to the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And just, weird. It's an odd, eerie prediction of future events in a comic book. Kind of neat to see. Here on the next page, we see image info, which is really nothing more than just updates about what was going on with Image Comics and what was upcoming with Image Comics. Just little, as we see, the first part is called blah, blah, blah. It's an update from Terry Fitzgerald talking about the upcoming Violator miniseries Then we have little blurbs about upcoming issues, the Max #2, Bloodstrike #1. If you'd like to see more about Bloodstrike #1, check out my video on Bloodstrike #1. Strangely enough, one for Deathblow #1 here, which is what we're looking at right now. It seems odd, but whatever. It was probably something that they printed in a lot of issues. And on the next page, we see an advertisement for Deathmate Black in July. Again, I will get around to making videos on the Deathmate miniseries as I do have all the issues. And just in case you were wondering, that was the end of Deathblow #1. That was the whole first issue, which is insane to think about because while the book's artwork is spectacular and it is telling a very deep look at Deathblow's psychological profile and the fact that he's most likely dealing with PTSD, it is such a change in tone from what we saw of Deathblow in Darker Image, which was the last time we saw the character. And, you know, if you haven't seen my video on Darker Image, please check it out. But in that, we saw Deathblow in the jungles of South America on his way to assassinate a general, and we saw members of the US government sending a crack team of elite special forces to go take him out. And we also saw that there were, clues to the fact that maybe the whole thing was a setup and that Deathblow was being betrayed by the government because they needed a fall guy for the assassination of the general. And it was this whole big setup for this twist and turn narrative. And then we get to this issue and we don't get any kind of payoff or continuation of the story that we just saw him in mere months before in Darker Image #1. It makes so little sense that we would have had that story in Darker Image #1 and then transition to what feels like a completely different story in Deathblow #1. It's so weird. I don't understand what Jim Lee's plan was in this, but it feels like it doesn't make sense at all. Now, if you think the Deathblow story seemed rather short, that's because it is sharing this book with Cybernary. If you turn the book around to the back side, the back cover is actually the cover to Cybernary #1. And you probably may not remember Cybernary, and that's because it didn't amount to a whole lot. However, I find it to be the more intriguing of the two stories that are within this book, though I would like to point out that this cover is an absolute mess. This is a perfect example of what happens when you just try to cram way too much detail into an image. You see all this mess down on the bottom, and it just seems to be an absolute cluster of weird cybernetics that don't necessarily seem to have any purpose. You have this character in the middle who is just holding some weird sword and has cybernetic limbs and big giant metal ram horns coming out of their head for whatever reason. And then you've got cables coming out of their eyes. You have this monster face on the side. You have the forehead and glasses of what looks to be a normal guy over here. And it's just a mess. You don't know what's going on. You don't know what's happening. And it's not even necessarily an eye-catching image either because it's so dark. Of course, it's most likely that the Deathblow image and cover is what would have been facing out at a comic book store. But still, this is just one of those covers that I feel like could have been so much better than it is. But again, this is what happens when you don't have any oversight or an editor and the creators are just allowed to do whatever they want, which in most cases is really cool. But in some cases, you wind up with someone who's just kind of, stroking their own ego, if that's the right term. But at any rate, let's get into this book. It's actually not bad. Brandon Choi, Jim Lee, co-creators, story. Steve Gerber, script. Nick Manabat, or Manabat, I'm not certain how to say his last name, art. Joe Chiodo, colors. Mike Heisler, letterer. Wendy Fouts, color assist. Kevin Cunningham, production. J. Herman Mendoza, editor. Chameleon Prime, color separator. Now you may notice that here on the very first page, we have an upside down image for Cyberforce number 0. And the reason for this is that even though you turned the book upside down to get the Cybernary cover, and it stays that way to read all of the credits for the Cybernary story, you actually just read this book front to back from the Deathblow cover, and the Cybernary story picks up right after the halfway point, which is odd. I don't know, but we're going to go back to it right now. As we dive back into the book, we see the transition from where the book turns from Deathblow number 1 into the Cybernary number 1, as it's stated here. I'm not certain if this was just an editing mistake or if the original working title of the book was The Cybernary instead of just Cybernary, but that's what they've got written here on the page. Here on the very first page of the story, we see that we are located in the fictitious location of Gamora, which is the name of the city, the nation, and the island that this story is taking place on. We see here the hunter-killers who are all just completely teched out with all kinds of cybernetics and crazy over-the-top advanced future weapons, and apparently they're wearing some sort of Judas Priest outfits as well, and then they have these crazy cyber monster dog things, and they're out on the hunt for a character that we're going to meet in just a moment. We see here who I believe is our main protagonist hiding behind some trees as her pursuers are scanning the area around for her. I'd like to point out that she is very humanoid. Well, I guess more almost elf-like in appearance. She does have the pointed ears, but her face is very normal, whereas the hunter-killers are more cyber orc-like or cyber goblin. I'm not certain. But they quickly realize that she's there. They see her trying to sneak off. They go for her. They refer to her as a nymphadroid, which leads me to believe that she was created as basically some kind of automated sex slave type of thing that also seems to have some sort of AI. One of the hunter killers mentions that he wants to have his turn with her before they bring her back. However, they get nixed by the leader because she apparently belongs to someone named Kazin, who I can only guess is a very high-ranking official. It's not really explained. However, he tells them to quickly turn off all of their bioorganic receptors and go full cyber mode, which they do. She, however, turns and comes at them, which they realize is not correct. They believe that she's a malfunctioning unit, and then they release their Predatech hounds to take her down. I find it funny that these guys are all carrying super huge, over-the-top cyber future weapons, and she has some sort of pistol and also a sword. It just, I always love how swords somehow come back in future tech stories. Here on the next page, we get a 2-page spread of a vertical, thanks a whole lot there, Jim, image of Union. It's a cool advertisement. It's a really cool fold out. I dig it. Once again, the vertical layout, because all of the early creators in Image apparently hated me and wanted to make it very difficult for me to make videos on their books in the future. Back into the action, we get a huge 2-page spread of the Predatech hounds going after our protagonist. And this is, again, where the stylization and the over-the-top detail almost kind of gets in the way of telling the story. You can see that she's here. Apparently, this Preditech hound has been shot, possibly, and this one, I guess, is having its head or maybe its torso cut in half. She disperses with them quickly, tells them that their hounds can burn in hell, and so can they. We see that she gets off 3 shots into one of the hunter-killers, keeps on shooting, puts 2 in the chest of the next one. Then she's turning to start firing at the others. However, they're regrouping and coming after her. Again, there's just so much. It almost feels like clutter in certain aspects. And it really is difficult to try and, follow action when there's this much going on. There really needed to be a little bit less, or maybe just a little bit less black. I don't know. I mean, again, they did what they were going for in terms of artistic tone and feel, and I can applaud them for going after what they wanted, but it didn't necessarily translate into a super easy to follow narrative for us, the readers. Here on the next page, we see that the hunter-killers have decided to just go full Rambo and completely start lighting up the entire countryside, trying to take out the target, which is funny because they were trying to bring her back completely unharmed, and now that 3 or 4 of them are dead, they're reconsidering all of that. We see that they're just laying waste with their crazy future guns, and this guy has some sort of weird shoulder-mounted, I want to say rocket launcher, but these aren't really rockets unless they're mini rockets, but they do cause a huge explosion and a crater, which she is now face down in. They're surprised that she seems mostly undamaged, even though she was just blown up. And they even call it back in that her ability to withstand damage far exceeds what her unit model should be able to do, as we see that she may have just been playing possum as she starts to look back at her attackers. On the next page, we get an advertisement for Frank Miller's Sin City collection, which I don't know if it was a full collection of the entire run of Sin City, but if it was, it would have been a really cool buy to get back then. Sin City, fantastic story, fantastic art, completely changed a lot of what many people thought comics could be, kind of turned the industry a little bit upside down at the time. If you've never seen the movies or read the books, do both. They're all great. You won't regret it. Here on the next page, we get an advertisement for Comics Express, which was a mail service in which you could order signed comic books through the mail. And I have to wonder if any of these books are valuable in any way at this point, simply because with there not being any way to validate the signatures at the time, I'm not sure if CGC would grade any of these with a signature series certification. I'd be interested in knowing if anyone has some of these, whether or not they still have any kind of value on the open market. There's a reason we don't really see these kind of services anymore, and I have a feeling that a lot of the people who paid for this stuff may not ever be able to recoup the money that they put into it. We see here on the next page that our protagonist has quickly jumped back to her feet, sliced the throat of one of her attackers, taking a grenade off of his chest. There's one guy left over here who's still in her face. He's basically daring her to use the grenade because, as he states, at this distance, it will kill the 2 of them. And he's basically calling her bluff, but we may see that he's about to regret doing that. Here on the next page, we're treated to a really cool sequence of events where instead of backing down from him, or essentially calling her bluff, she instead rears back and punches the grenade directly into his stomach and turns around and runs away. 2 of the other hunter-killers start running up to come to his aid. He's trying to warn them, telling them to stay back, But it's too late, and we see a huge explosion killing all of them as she jumps off the side of a cliff. She is then tumbling down the edge of the cliff, bouncing along the ground. We see her dropping her sword here. And then at the bottom of the cliff, we see some other new characters coming up out of the ground through trapdoors. They are speaking a language that is, I guess, made up for the book. It doesn't look like anything I've ever seen. However, one of them does seem to speak English and tells the rest that she is not a hunter-killer and that they're going to take her down below and see if she is salvageable. And then we see her losing consciousness as a tear drops from her eye, and the story is to be continued. Here on the next page, we see the standard letter section that was at the back of almost all Image comic books, where people are mostly just writing in, talking about how much they enjoyed Darker Image and how they really liked Deathblow in Darker Image, though I'd be very interested in seeing what their opinions were of Deathblow #1, being that it was so different in tone and story than what they read in Darker Image. The page after that, we see an advertisement for Wildcats trading cards, which I do not have any of. They were all printed through Topps, and I wouldn't mind grabbing some if I ever saw them somewhere, but I'll just have to keep an eye out for them. And here on the final page of the book, what do you know? We're back to our Cyberforce #0 advertisement, because we already saw this from having to read the inside cover of the Cybernary book. And this is where, like I said, it all just gets kind of weird. But I don't know. It just seems to me like maybe they should have tried to print it where the Cybernary story read from the Cybernary cover. But apparently that was too difficult to do logistically. Either way, it's still a pretty fun story. And that was Deathblow / Cybernary #1. Like I said, as much as I enjoyed Deathblow as a character and as fantastic as Jim Lee's artwork was, this first issue was really lackluster in my opinion. There's almost nothing that's tying it to what we saw in Darker Image. The pacing seems, incredibly slow. You're just kind of thrown into what almost feels like a different story from what you were expecting. And maybe that's what Jim Lee was going for. But as a reader, it was very jarring to go from one story of espionage and intrigue and action and betrayal to go into a story of a man who's just fighting his own personal demons and struggling with his own remorse for his actions. It was a huge shift. And again, despite the fact that Cybernary was nowhere near as successful as Deathblow, and the artwork was not bad, but a little bit congested in a lot of ways and sometimes difficult to follow, the tone of that book and the story I felt were far more intriguing in this issue, at least. The idea of, a completely different society and almost a standalone state that the rest of the world wasn't really interacting with, where it has this crazy technology and there's these weird, cyber orc people and super futuristic tech. It was really neat to see. And, it was a cool beginning to a story. It left the reader wanting more, whereas the Deathblow story just kind of, fell flat in a lot of ways. But again, these are just my opinions. If you enjoyed Deathblow #1, that's what you like. It's fine. If you didn't like Cybernary, again, a lot of people didn't, so I'm not surprised. It's fine. If you did enjoy today's video, though, please like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Have a nice day.